There's a house on my street that has been empty for longer than I've been alive. At least, that's how people always described it. Empty, abandoned, condemned. Those were the words adults used whenever it came up. Usually in that offhand way, people talk about things they've stopped really seeing. But even when I was a kid, I remember thinking those words didn't fit. An abandoned place is supposed to feel dead. It's supposed to feel forgotten. This house never did. It stood 3 houses down from the corner, set back a little farther than the others, with a sagging front porch and blackened upper windows that reflected almost nothing. The paint had long since peeled away in long strips, exposing warped gray boards underneath. Vines had climbed up one side of the porch and stayed there for years, as if they had reached a point no one was willing to cross. The gate was always half open. The mailbox leaned to one side. One of the front steps had cracked down the middle sometime before I started school and stayed that way for as long as I can remember. And yet, it was never touched. Not renovated. Not torn down. Not sold. People mowed around it. They parked across from it. Kids crossed the street to avoid the sidewalk directly in front of it, even when they pretended they weren't doing that. Delivery drivers never paused at it because there was never any mail to bring and never any package left on the porch. No moving truck ever pulled up outside. No electrician, no painter, no crew. It was just there. Year after year. Like part of the street, in the same way the lampposts or the cracked storm drain at the corner were part of the street. Permanent, unexplained, accepted. When I was younger, I used to ask about it. Not because I was especially brave or especially curious. Kids just ask about things adults have decided not to think about anymore. Who lived there? No one now. Why not? Because they don't. Did someone die there? That question usually got me a look. Not angry, just tired. The kind adults give when they don't want to decide whether you're too young to know the answer or old enough to ask better questions. The answers changed depending on who I asked. Some people said an old couple used to live there and both died within a year of each other. Some said it belonged to a family that left suddenly and never came back. Some said the bank took it. Some said the city owned it. Some said no one technically owned it anymore, which made no sense to me even then. Once, when I was maybe 10 or 11, one of the older women on our block said the house was kept for remembrance. And when I asked what that meant, she just smiled in that vague, unhelpful way old people sometimes do when they've said more than they meant to. I stopped asking eventually, partly because I got older, mostly because the house did what a lot of things do when you grow up around them. It stopped being interesting and became background. It was just the house on our street, the one no one lived in, the one no one fixed, the one no one explained. And every year, for one weekend, it opened. That was the part no one found strange because everyone had known it their whole lives. 2 nights out of the year, usually sometime in late fall when the air had started to sharpen and the trees had given up most of their leaves, the house would come alive. Lights would appear in the windows. The front porch would get swept. Temporary signs would go up by the sidewalk. Extension cords would snake out from somewhere in the back. People from nearby streets would show up before dark. Cars would line both curbs all the way to the stop sign. And the old abandoned house would become a haunted attraction, not a professional one. Nothing you bought tickets for online or saw advertised anywhere outside the neighborhood. It wasn't a church fundraiser. It wasn't a city event. It was just ours. That was the only way people ever talked about it. You going through the house this year? Are they opening the house Friday or Saturday first? My brother's helping in the house. We used to help with the house. Everybody knew what the house meant. And whenever anyone asked why it was done, the answer was always some variation of the same sentence. To honor the dead. That was the official explanation, if you can call it that. It sounded old, even when I first heard it. Like something repeated so many times, no one bothered questioning it anymore. The phrase floated around every year attached to the same event, but no one ever pinned it down. Which dead? Dead from what? Why this house? Why a haunted attraction? Why make something festive out of remembrance? No one ever gave a clear answer. Or if they had one, they didn't give it to people my age. As a kid, I accepted that the way kids accept lots of half-finished explanations. Adults say something in a serious tone, and you assume there must be context you don't understand yet. As a teenager, I stopped accepting it and started dismissing it. That was easier. You hear "to honor the dead" attached to strobe lights and fake screams and neighborhood volunteers in makeup. And after a while, it sounds less like tradition and more like something people keep saying because nobody wants to admit the whole thing is weird. Which it was. It was weird. Not just the house itself, but the crowd it drew. That was always the strangest part to me. It wasn't just teenagers looking for something dumb to do on a Friday night, though there were plenty of those. It wasn't just parents dragging kids through a local haunted house because it was cheap and close to home, though there were plenty of those too. It was everyone. Families with strollers, middle school kids trying to act unimpressed, high schoolers daring each other to go in alone, people in their 20s home visiting parents for the weekend, and older neighbors, always the same ones, who arrived before the sun had fully gone down and stood outside the gate talking quietly among themselves before eventually going in. The older people never treated it like an attraction. That was the thing. They didn't smile much. They didn't joke around in line. They didn't talk about which parts were scary or which volunteer played which monster. They just waited, went in, and came out quieter than before. As a kid, I noticed that without understanding it. As I got older, I noticed it and chose not to think about it. That was easier too. Because the truth is, I never liked the house. Not in any dramatic way. I wasn't afraid of it in the classic sense. It didn't give me nightmares. I didn't dare friends to knock on the door and run away. I didn't tell stories about ghosts or murderers or hidden rooms. I just didn't like looking at it for too long. There was something about its proportions that always felt wrong to me. Not visibly wrong. Not enough that you'd point to it and say that doesn't make sense. Just subtle things. The upstairs windows looked too tall. The porch roof sat lower than it should have. The side of the house facing the alley always seemed darker than the rest of the block, even in full sun. If you glanced at it while walking by, it looked like a neglected old place. If you stood still and really looked, it felt like it wasn't arranged correctly. That sounds stupid now. I know it does. But it's true. And because of that, I never once went in. Not as a kid. Not when my classmates did and came back laughing about fake blood and actors jumping out of closets. Not in middle school when people started going through in groups and acting like it was some rite of passage. Not in high school when everyone treated it like a joke and filmed parts of the line for social media. Every year, I found a reason not to go. Usually, I didn't even need a reason. I just said I wasn't interested. Which was also true, at least mostly true. If I'm being honest now, I think what really kept me away was that I didn't want the inside to explain the outside. The attraction made the house legible. That was the whole idea. It took this old, unsettling thing that had always stood on our street, half outside the normal logic of the neighborhood, and turned it into something understandable. A haunted house? A local tradition? A place with actors and sound effects and fake scares, and a defined route from front door to exit. Something with a beginning and an end. Maybe part of me preferred not knowing. Maybe part of me thought going inside would either ruin the feeling or confirm it. Either way, I stayed away. My friends knew that and eventually stopped asking. The house became one of those things people associated with me in an annoying way. You still never been in? Nope. You're serious? Yeah. What are you scared of? Nothing. That answer only made them laugh more, of course. And every year I let them. Then one year, for reasons I still can't explain in a way that sounds satisfying, I said yes. There was nothing special about the day. That's important. No storm, no weird mood, no dare that pushed me too far, no sudden burst of curiosity after years of refusing. It was just a cold evening, and we were already outside. A few of us had been walking back from the gas station with drinks and snacks, cutting through the block the long way because no one wanted to go home yet. The house was open. You could tell from halfway down the street because of the lights in the windows and the noise drifting out toward the sidewalk. Metal rattling somewhere inside. Low music, the occasional fake scream that made people in line laugh. Cars lined the curb. Kids were clustered near the gate. Someone from my street was standing by the porch steps in a bad corpse makeup, talking to a family with 2 little kids, like he wasn't dressed for a funeral attraction. It all looked exactly like it always had. Ordinary in the way repeated strangeness becomes ordinary. One of my friends looked over at me and said, "You're going in this year." Not asked, said. I should have shrugged it off like I always did. Instead, I glanced at the line, then at the house, and for some reason said, "Sure." They all reacted at once, half laughing, half acting like they'd just won something. No way. You're serious? You've seriously never been in? Tonight's the night. I laughed a little because that was the easiest thing to do, but even while I did, I felt that old reluctance come back. Not enough to stop me, just enough that I noticed it. We got in line. The crowd moved slowly. Families went in first, then clumps of teenagers, then older couples and neighbors who didn't seem interested in the fake horror part at all. Standing there, I had time to really look at the house up close in a way I hadn't for years. It looked better and worse at the same time. The porch had been swept. Temporary lanterns had been hung near the railings. A few cheap decorations were fixed to the front of the house. Black fabric, fake cobwebbing, wood signs painted with warnings in dripping red letters. But none of that disguised the fact that the house itself was still decaying underneath it all. The front boards were weathered. The left porch post had a crack running down most of its length. One upstairs window looked like it had been replaced with plywood and then painted dark to blend in. The effect was strange. The decorations were trying to make the house look spooky, but the house didn't need help. A little girl ahead of us was clutching her father's hand and asking if there were real zombies inside. Her older brother kept insisting there were chainsaws. Their mother told them both to calm down because it's just actors. That phrase stuck with me. It's just actors. I remember hearing it and feeling relieved. That was the whole point, right? Whatever the house had always felt like from the outside, tonight it was just a neighborhood event. A route through some old rooms, volunteers jumping out at people, sound effects, costume makeup, a thing with an ending. By the time we got to the porch, I had almost convinced myself that was all it was. The front door was open. Inside, I could see a narrow hallway lit in dim reds and weak yellows. There were props just inside the entrance. Old frames, fake warning signs, strips of plastic hanging from one doorway farther in. Somewhere deeper in the house, someone screamed in a theatrical, exaggerated way that made a group ahead of us laugh. One of my friends bumped my shoulder. Still time to back out. I shook my head. No, I'm good. And I meant it. Or I thought I did. We stepped onto the porch together, the old boards creaking under our weight. I looked once over my shoulder toward the street, toward the familiar houses, the neighbors, the parked cars, the people in line. And then back toward the open doorway. Everything was normal, organized, contained. We crossed the threshold as a group, and immediately, it all felt exactly like what everyone had always said it was. A normal haunted house. The first thing that hit me was how narrow everything felt. Not claustrophobic exactly, just tighter than it looked from the outside. The hallway we stepped into was longer than I expected, with walls that seemed to lean in slightly the farther you walked. The lighting was dim, but not dark enough to hide anything. Red bulbs mixed with weak yellow light, casting uneven shadows that moved just enough to make everything feel active. It was exactly what you'd expect. That was the strange part. After everything I had built up in my head over the years, after all the quiet unease that house had given me just from the outside, the inside felt normal, cheap even. The walls were covered in black fabric in some places, exposed wood in others, fake stains painted along the lower edges, handwritten signs nailed crookedly into beams. Turn back, don't go further, the usual stuff. Someone had clearly put effort into it, but it was still obvious what it was. A setup, a path, a controlled experience. One of my friends laughed almost immediately. "Bro, this is it? You've been avoiding this for years?" I shrugged, trying to play it off. "I told you, I just never cared." Another one nudged me as something rattled loudly behind a wall panel to our right. A metallic scraping sound, followed by a sudden thump. "Dude, you're about to get destroyed in here." I smirked a little. I think I'll survive. We kept moving. The hallway bent slightly to the left, then narrowed even more before opening into a small room. A figure stepped out from behind a hanging sheet. Somebody in a torn coat and pale makeup, face painted to look hollowed out. They moved toward us slowly, dragging one foot in an exaggerated limp. "Stay with us," they said in a low, drawn-out voice. One of my friends flinched back instinctively, then laughed right after. Okay, that one got me a little. The actor held the stare for a second longer, then stepped aside, letting us pass. That was when it fully settled in. It was all staged. Every movement, every sound, every reaction, even the timing. We moved deeper into the house, following the path without really thinking about it. The layout was tight, almost maze-like, but clearly intentional. Narrow corridors opened into small rooms, then funneled back into tighter passages again. At one point, something slammed against the wall on our left, making the entire hallway shake slightly. "All right, that was decent," someone said behind me. Another voice laughed. "You jumped." I did not jump. "You literally—" The conversation faded as we kept walking. The sounds blended together the longer we were inside. Metal dragging somewhere ahead. A low hum that might have been music or just ambient noise. Occasional footsteps that didn't quite match the rhythm of the group. It all felt layered, but still controlled, still explainable. We turned another corner and entered a slightly wider space. The ceiling here was lower, forcing us to duck a little. Plastic strips hung from the doorway ahead, brushing lightly against shoulders as people walked through. The lighting flickered once, not dramatically, just enough to notice. One of my friends pushed through the strips first. "Come on." The rest followed. I stayed half a step behind, not for any real reason, just enough that I wasn't directly in the middle of the group anymore. That was when my phone buzzed. It felt louder than it should have. The vibration echoed slightly in the tight space, or maybe it just felt that way because everything else had gone quiet for a second. I pulled it out instinctively, glancing at the screen. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. For a second, I just stared at it, letting it buzz in my hand while the others moved ahead. One of them looked back briefly. "You coming?" "Yeah, 1 second," I said. They shrugged and kept going. The plastic strips swayed behind them, then settled. I answered the call. "Hello?" For a second, there was nothing. No background noise, no static, just silence on the other end. Then a voice. Low, close. "Stay inside." I frowned slightly. "What?" "Stay inside," the voice repeated. It wasn't loud. It wasn't distorted. If anything, that made it worse. It sounded normal. Too normal. Like someone speaking directly into the phone without moving. "Who is this?" I asked. No response. Just a faint pause. Then, "Don't leave." Something about the way it was said made me hesitate. Not fear, just confusion. "Is this a joke?" I said. Nothing. No reaction, no laugh, no shift in tone. Just silence again for a second. Then the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. Call ended. No voicemail. No follow-up. Just the number still there. I stood there for a moment, listening. The sounds of the attraction came back slowly. Distant now, less defined. I shook my head slightly. "Okay," I muttered under my breath. Probably one of my friends, or someone else in the house messing around. It wasn't hard to imagine someone grabbing a number and trying to add to the experience. Stay inside. Don't leave. It fit the theme. I put the phone back in my pocket and stepped forward. Pushed through the hanging strips. The hallway beyond was empty. I stopped. Looked ahead. Then behind me. The strips swayed slightly, then went still. No voices, no footsteps, no laughter. I took a few steps forward. "Hey," I called out. No answer. I walked faster, turned the corner. Nothing. Another hallway. Another bend. Still no one. The sounds that had filled the space just moments before were gone. Not faded. Gone. I slowed down, frowning. "They're probably messing with me," I said quietly. It sounded stupid as soon as I said it. I turned again. Another empty stretch. Another doorway. The layout felt the same. But something about it wasn't. I stopped in the middle of the hallway. Listened. Nothing. No actors. No group ahead. No one behind. Just silence. I reached for my phone again, more out of habit than anything else. The screen lit up. No new calls, no messages. I looked up, down the hallway, at the doorways, at the corners, and for the first time since entering the house, something felt wrong. Not staged, not controlled. Wrong. I turned slowly, scanning the space again, trying to figure out where everyone had gone, trying to remember exactly which direction they had taken. But the path I had just followed didn't look the same anymore. I stood there for a second longer, then another, and realized something I couldn't explain. They weren't just ahead of me. They were gone. At first, I told myself it was part of the attraction. That was the easiest explanation. They had probably split the group on purpose, sent everyone down slightly different paths, made it feel more isolating, more intense. That made sense. It fit everything I had seen so far. All right, I muttered to myself, walking forward again. Very funny. My voice sounded different. Not louder, just flatter. Like the hallway didn't carry it the way it should. I turned the next corner quickly, expecting to see them just ahead. Nothing. Another hallway, same narrow walls, same dim lighting. But it didn't feel like the same space anymore. I stopped, looked behind me. The way I had just come from didn't look familiar, not in the way it should. I frowned, trying to replay it in my head. I had stepped through the plastic strips, walked forward, turned right, then left. Or had it been left first? I turned back the way I thought I came, walked a few steps. The hallway ended in a wall. I slowed down. No, I said quietly. That wasn't right. There had been a turn there. I was sure of it. I turned back around, looked at the other direction. Still the same narrow stretch, still the same dim lights. Okay. I let out a short breath, trying to steady myself. It's a maze, that's all it is. I walked forward again. Faster this time. Another turn, another corridor, then a door. I stopped in front of it. I hadn't seen any doors like this before. The others had been open, or covered with hanging sheets, or clearly part of the setup. This one was closed. Plain, old wood. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then opened it. The room behind it didn't match anything I'd seen so far. It was empty. No props, no decorations, no lighting effects. Just a bare room. Faint light from somewhere above. Walls that looked older than the rest of the house. I stepped inside slowly. The air felt different. Still. Heavy. I turned back toward the hallway. The door I had just come through looked wrong. Not wrong in a way I could point to. Just different. I stepped back out into the hallway, closed the door behind me. This isn't funny, I said louder this time. My voice didn't carry. It dropped, like the space around me absorbed it. I started walking again. Faster now. "Guys?" I called out. Nothing. No response. No echo. The further I went, the less the place felt like an attraction. The walls weren't covered anymore. No fake stains, no decorations, just plain surfaces. Darker, more worn. I passed another doorway, looked inside, another empty room, then another. Same thing. My footsteps sounded off. Not louder, not quieter. Just wrong. Out of sync with how I was moving. I slowed down, took a step, listened. The sound came a fraction too late. I froze, then took another step. Same thing. A delay. I stopped completely. The sound of my last step seemed to linger longer than it should, then fade. From somewhere far away, I heard something. A noise. It could have been metal, or a door, or something dragging. I turned toward it, listened. It didn't come again. But I could feel it, somewhere deeper in the house. I started moving in that direction, not because I wanted to, because it was the only thing that felt like a reference point. The hallway narrowed again, then widened, then bent in a way I didn't remember. The lighting changed, not suddenly, gradually. The red tones faded, the yellow dimmed. Everything became neutral, flat. I passed another corner, turned, and stopped. The space ahead of me didn't make sense. It wasn't part of the house. I knew that immediately. The walls were different. The proportions were wrong. The ceiling was higher. Too high. I stood there, staring at it, trying to connect it to anything I had seen before. Nothing matched. "This isn't part of it," I said under my breath. There was no response, no sound at all. I took a step forward, then another. Crossed into the space. The air shifted again, heavier, colder. I turned slowly, looking around. This wasn't a room in the house. It wasn't even trying to look like one. And that was the moment something settled in that I couldn't push away anymore. This wasn't part of the attraction. I had gone somewhere else. At first, I thought it was just another room, a different section of the attraction. Something more detailed, maybe. A change in theme. That was still the part of my brain trying to hold everything together, trying to fit what I was seeing into something that made sense. But that explanation didn't last long. The space I had stepped into wasn't just different. It was complete. There were no decorations, no fake textures, no signs that anything had been set up recently. It looked like a real place. I took another step forward, slower now. The floor beneath me wasn't the same wood I had been walking on before. It felt older, slightly uneven, not damaged, just worn in a way that comes from years of use. I looked around. The room was wider than anything I'd seen in the house so far. The walls were painted in a muted color I couldn't immediately place. The light was soft, coming from somewhere above and behind me, but not harsh or artificial like the red and yellow lighting from before. It felt natural. That was the problem. I turned slightly to the left. There was a doorway leading into another room. No hanging sheets, no props, just an open frame. I stood there for a moment. Something about the layout was familiar. not in a clear way. Not yet. Just enough that my body reacted before my mind caught up. I stepped through the doorway. The next room was smaller. A table stood in the center, wooden, scratched in places. I froze. I knew that table. Not because it looked like a table I had seen before, because it was the table. The edges were worn in the same places. The surface had the same faint marks near one corner. There was a slight unevenness in one of the legs that made it tilt just a fraction if you leaned on the wrong side. I stepped closer. Slowly. No. The word came out without me meaning to say it. I reached out, placing my hand lightly on the surface. It felt exactly the way I remembered. That wasn't possible. I pulled my hand back slightly, looked around again. The room sharpened. The walls, the spacing, the way the doorway behind me aligned with the next one across the room. I turned toward that second doorway, walked through it, and stopped. The kitchen. Not just a kitchen, the kitchen. Everything was there, exactly where it had always been. The cabinets, the sink, the small window above it. Even the way the light fell across the counter felt right. I stepped further inside. There was a smell, faint, but unmistakable. Something warm, something old, something I hadn't noticed in years because I hadn't been there in years. I turned slowly in place, trying to find something that didn't match, something that would break the illusion. There was nothing. Everything was exact. The kind of exact that can't be recreated unless you've lived inside it. This isn't real, I said quietly. But the words didn't feel right, because it felt real. I moved toward the far side of the kitchen. There was another doorway. I already knew where it led. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. The hallway, long, narrow, carpeted. I could see the door at the end. I stood there, staring at it. My chest tightened slightly. I hadn't thought about this place in years. Not really. It had been background, a part of my childhood that existed somewhere in memory but didn't come up often. But now, it was here. Not remembered, recreated. Number, not recreated. Replaced. I stepped into the hallway. The air felt heavier, not uncomfortable, just full, like something was there with me. Then I heard it. A sound, soft, from one of the rooms, a voice. I froze. It wasn't clear enough to understand. Just the rhythm of speech, the cadence, familiar. I turned my head slightly toward the sound. It came from the room on the left. The one that... I stopped myself. I didn't want to finish that thought. Another sound followed. A different voice. Lower. Answering. My chest tightened again. I knew those voices. Not exactly. Not word for word. But the pattern, the tone, the way they moved through the space. I took a step toward the door. Then another. My hand hovered near the frame. I didn't touch it. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, listening. The voices continued. Calm, normal, like nothing was wrong, like I was the one who didn't belong. I stepped back, turned slowly. The hallway stretched behind me. too long. Longer than it should have been. I hadn't noticed that before. I looked toward the kitchen again. It was still there. Still perfect. Still exactly the same. But something had shifted. The feeling of familiarity wasn't comforting anymore. It was wrong. Not because the details were off, because they were too right. I took another step back, then another, trying to create distance, trying to break the connection. But the more I moved, the clearer it became. This wasn't a memory. It wasn't a themed room. It wasn't part of anything that had been set up for people to walk through and react to. This place existed on its own, independent of the house I had entered, independent of the attraction. I turned slowly in a full circle, taking everything in again. The walls, the furniture, the layout, the light, every detail. There was no distortion, no exaggeration, no attempt to make it look like something else. It was exact. And that was the moment the last explanation I had been holding on to finally collapsed. This wasn't part of the haunted house. I wasn't inside it anymore. I didn't know where I was. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't supposed to be here. I don't remember deciding to move. I just did. Standing still wasn't an option anymore. Not in that hallway. Not with those voices behind the doors. Not with the way everything around me felt too complete to be fake and too precise to be memory. So I walked, slowly at first, then with a kind of forced steadiness. Like if I kept moving in a straight line long enough, I'd eventually break through whatever this was and end up back in the house. Back in the attraction. Back where things made sense. The hallway stretched in front of me, but it didn't feel as long as it had a moment ago. That was the first thing that didn't line up. I had just thought it was too long. Too extended. Like it didn't belong to the space it was in. Now it felt normal again. Or at least closer to normal. I didn't stop to question that. I just kept going. The carpet under my feet absorbed my steps completely. No echo. No delay like before. Just silence. I passed one of the doors on the right. It was closed now. I was sure it had been open before. I hadn't looked inside, but I had seen the space beyond it. I remembered that. Now it was just a door. Flat. Still. I kept walking. The air felt thicker the further I went. Not harder to breathe, just heavier, like it carried something. At the end of the hallway, there was another room. I knew it before I reached it. Even before I could see inside, I knew what it was supposed to be. I stepped through the doorway. The living room. Everything was there. The couch against the far wall. The low table in front of it. The lamp in the corner that always cast light at an angle instead of straight down. The old cabinet along the side with the glass panels that never fully closed. I stopped just inside the room. I hadn't thought about this place in years. Not like this. Not in detail. But now every part of it was present. Not remembered. Not imagined. Present. I turned slowly, taking it in. The way the floor creaked slightly near the center. The faint discoloration on one part of the wall where something had been moved years ago. The way the light shifted depending on where you stood. Even the silence felt familiar. And that was when something else started to feel wrong. Not the room. Me. I took a step forward. The movement felt slightly disconnected, not delayed like before, just not entirely mine. I looked down at my hands. They looked normal, the same. I flexed my fingers. The movement followed. But there was a moment, just a fraction, where it felt like I was watching it happen instead of doing it. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said under my breath. I needed something to ground myself, something that didn't change. That was when I saw the mirror. It was mounted on the wall near the hallway entrance, exactly where it had always been. I hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe I had, and just hadn't focused on it. Now it stood out immediately. I stepped toward it. Each step felt heavier, not physically, just harder to commit to. I stopped a few feet away. For a second, I didn't look directly into it. I already knew something was wrong. I could feel it. Then I raised my eyes and saw myself. At least, something that was supposed to be me. I didn't react immediately, not in the way you'd expect. There was no jump, no sudden movement. Just a pause, because my brain didn't accept it right away. The shape was right, the position, the posture, but the details were wrong. The face looking back at me wasn't mine, not the way it should have been. The skin looked damaged, not cut, not wounded, worn, like it had been left out too long. The color was off, uneven. The eyes, I leaned slightly closer without meaning to. The eyes didn't match. They were set too deep, too still, not focused, like they were looking through me instead of at me. I took a step back. The reflection didn't match the movement exactly. Not delayed, just slightly off. I raised my hand. It raised its hand, but not at the same speed, a fraction slower, enough to notice. "No," I said again, louder this time. My voice didn't sound right. It came out flat, like the room didn't register it. I stepped back again. The reflection stayed where it was for just a moment longer than it should have, then adjusted. I felt something shift in my chest, a kind of pressure, not panic, not yet. Just the realization that something fundamental wasn't lining up anymore. "That's not," I started. I didn't finish the sentence because I didn't know what I was going to say. "That's not me? That's not real?" Neither of those felt right, because I was standing there, and something was standing there with me, and one of us wasn't right. Then the sound came, a knock, sharp, from somewhere behind me. I froze. Another knock, closer this time, from the front of the house. I turned slowly. The living room stretched toward the entrance. The door was there. Closed. The sound came again. Knock, knock, louder now, more urgent. Then a voice. "Open the door!" I stopped breathing for a second. I knew that voice. Not vaguely. Not in the way something feels familiar. I knew it. "Open the door," it said again. Closer now, right on the other side. My body reacted before my mind did. I took a step toward the door, then stopped. Something felt wrong. Not with the voice, with the situation. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection was still there, watching, not moving. I looked at the door again. Another knock, harder this time. Open the door. More urgent, more strained, like something was running out of time. My chest tightened. If that voice was real, if that was someone I knew, then I needed to open it, right? But the thought didn't settle, because something else pushed against it. A memory. The phone call. Stay inside. Don't leave. I felt my hand twitch slightly at my side. The door. The mirror. The voice. None of it lined up. I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if the thing in the mirror was me, or if the voice outside the door was. Another knock, louder, faster now. Open the door. The tone had changed, urgent, almost desperate. I took another step forward, stopped again. My head felt wrong, like my thoughts weren't connecting the way they should. I tried to remember what had just happened. The hallway, the rooms, the voices. It all felt distant now, like it had already happened a long time ago. Another knock, hard enough that the door shook slightly. Open the door. The voice cracked at the end. I flinched, my hand lifted, hovered in the air, between the door and nothing. I looked back at the mirror one more time. The reflection hadn't moved, but it was still watching, waiting. The knocking didn't stop. It got louder, faster, more aggressive, like whatever was on the other side wasn't going to wait much longer. I stood there, caught between two things I couldn't trust, and neither of them willing to let me decide slowly. The knocking reached a point where it filled the entire space. Every sound, every thought, just impact against the door, again and again and again. The knocking stopped, not gradually, not fading out, just gone. For a second, I didn't realize it. My body was still reacting to it, still bracing for the next impact, the next sound, the next voice forcing its way through whatever was on the other side of that door. My hand was still raised, my breathing still uneven, my focus still locked between the door and the mirror. Then everything broke, not like something collapsing, not like a structure giving way, more like a layer being removed. The room didn't disappear, didn't shatter or distort. It just wasn't there anymore. One moment I was standing in that living room, between the mirror and the door, between something that looked like me and something that sounded like someone I knew. And the next, I was somewhere else. I staggered slightly, my balance catching up to the change a fraction too late. The floor under me was different. Hard, flat, smooth. I looked up. The walls were bare. No furniture, no hallway, no doors. Just an empty room. Plain walls, neutral color, even lighting, no shadows, no sound. For a second, I didn't move. My body hadn't caught up yet. My mind was still trying to process what had just happened, trying to find a connection between where I had been and where I was now. There wasn't one. "Hey!" The voice came from behind me. I turned quickly. People were there, a small group, standing a few feet away, looking at me. Not in fear, not in shock, in confusion. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. I stared at them. They weren't dressed like actors. No costumes, no makeup, just normal clothes. Neighbors. I recognized some of them. Faces I had seen around the street for years. People I had passed without thinking about. "What?" I said. My voice sounded wrong. Not because of the space, because I didn't know how to use it. "You good?" someone else asked. I looked around again. The room was empty. Completely empty. No decorations. No setup. No signs of the attraction. Nothing. "Where?" I started, then stopped. The question didn't make sense. One of the older men stepped forward slightly. He looked at me like he was trying to figure something out. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. I paused. I didn't have an answer. "I came in with..." I gestured vaguely behind me. There was no door, just a wall. The space where the hallway should have been was blank. "I came in," I repeated, quieter this time. The man frowned slightly. "Came in where?" I stared at him. "The house," I said. A few of them exchanged looks. "What house?" someone else asked. I turned slowly. The walls didn't change. Still empty, still plain. "This house," I said. More uncertain now. The older man shook his head slightly. "It's not open yet." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "The attraction," he said. "It starts tomorrow." I blinked. That doesn't make sense. A woman near the back spoke up. "They're still setting it up," she said. "You're not supposed to be in here." I looked around again. No props, no lights, no sound. Nothing. "But I was just..." I stopped. The sentence didn't hold. There was nothing to point to, nothing to explain. No hallway, no rooms, no mirror, no door, just empty space. Someone moved closer. "You came in early or something?" they asked. I shook my head. "I came in with my friends." "Friends?" the older man repeated. "Yeah," I said quickly. We went through..." "You mean outside?" he asked. "No, inside," I said. He looked at the others again, then back at me. "There's nothing set up yet," he said. "They haven't even finished the rooms." The words hit differently this time. Not confusing, wrong, completely wrong. I looked at the walls again, trying to force something to come back. Anything. There was nothing. "All right," the man said after a moment. "Come on." He gestured toward a door on the far side of the room. A real door. Plain. I hadn't noticed it before. I followed without thinking. My legs moved automatically. We stepped through the doorway, and I was outside. The air felt sharp, cold, real. The street looked exactly the way it had before. Cars parked along the curb, people standing near the gate, kids talking loudly, someone laughing. Normal. Completely normal. I stopped just outside the entrance. My friends were there, standing a few feet away. One of them looked over. "There you are," he said. I stared at him. "You just disappeared, man." I stopped. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. "You good?" another one asked. "Yeah," I said automatically. The word came out too fast, too easy. "Yeah, I'm good." They didn't question it, didn't press. "Place isn't even open yet," one of them said, nodding toward the house. "They're still setting it up." I looked back. The house stood there, dark, no lights in the windows, no sound from inside. Just the same abandoned structure it had always been, waiting. "You trying to go tomorrow?" someone asked. I didn't answer right away. I just kept looking at it, trying to find something, anything that matched what I had just experienced. There was nothing. "No," I said finally. "I'm good." We left after that. No one talked about it. Not really. They moved on to something else. Plans, jokes, normal conversation. And I let them. I didn't bring it up. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. Because I didn't have a way to explain it. There was nothing to point to. Nothing to prove. Just a gap. Something that had happened. Without leaving anything behind. Except one thing. Sometimes. Not often. But sometimes. I think about that moment. Standing in front of that door. The voice on the other side. The mirror behind me. And the feeling that whatever choice I made there was the one that mattered. And I can't remember what I did. That's the part that never sits right. Not the house, not the rooms, not even the reflection. That moment. Right before everything ended, it's gone. And sometimes, when I think about it too long, I get this feeling that I didn't leave. Not really.